My name is David Polinchock. We were talking about my experiences. I actually started as a Disney character many years ago. Maybe about 25 years ago, a buddy of mine introduced me to this thing called virtual reality, which nobody knew anything about back in 1990. It was this weird technology. And I started doing events and started working with marketing and brand companies. And through the 90s, we did events all over the world. We talked about emerging tech. We talked about how VR was going to change the whole advertising industry. Movies like Lawnmower Man came out, and everybody went, "Ooh, VR is about bad and taking over your brain." People would come in and see what we were doing. Anybody do VR in the 90s? Anybody? One person in the back. Remember how crappy it was? Yeah, it was crappy. You're talking like pixels, like a pixel, right, on the screen. It was horrible stuff. We traveled with a computer that cost $175,000, and was like the size of one of these chairs. And you couldn't it wasn't like you turned it on. It was like you started it, and then there were like 25 steps you went through to get it to work. And we'd get a lot of people who would come up and go, "How come it doesn't look like it does in the movies?" Which is always strange to me, because, like, dude, the movie's not real. So, of course, it doesn't look anything like that, because it's not real. So, as you know, maybe know, VR stopped somewhere around 99-ish when it just didn't go anywhere. It was ungodly expensive. We talked today about distribution issues. I mean, seriously, in the 90s, we had maybe 500 head mounts in the world. So it went away. I went off and did other things. I've run media labs. I ran a lab for AT&T. I've run labs of my own. And it was kind of funny to me when the first Oculus hit the Kickstarter. Because honestly, I was kind of arrogantly like, yeah, I've been there. It's not that cool anymore. No real idea how it was going to change what we now know is happening in both VR and AR. So I'm assuming you've all done VR now. Anybody not do VR? This is a couple of VR setups here. You should try, like, Nokia. Bell Labs has a VR setup if you haven't done it. So started happening again. I would go to panels and I would hear people talk about it, and I'm obviously saying this for humor, not direct accuracy, but literally people would be like, "So we started our company the day before yesterday, and we just closed a $12 million funding round." And I was kind of looking at it going, I did VR for 10 years, all in the 90s. I closed $15,000 funding round. It was from my mom. And she's still bitching to me about it. I'm thinking, there's something wrong here. I should get back in the space. So I've kind of hopped back into VR and AR and what it's going to look like. But what I found has been interesting is that as I've talked to both people who would use VR and people who make VR, I hear consistent things, right? So how many of you have not seen a VR experience that made you go, "Oh my God, this is the most awesome thing ever"? Right? We occasionally see something that's kind of interesting. How many of you have paid for an Oculus or a Vive setup? One, right? Because we don't really know what to do with it yet. And we're still looking for it. And over the last maybe 2 months, I've had a lot of conversations with people saying, "How come there's no good content?" And I've talked to hardware people who say, "How come there's no good content?" I talk to content people and they say, "How come there's no good content?" I talk to agency friends. They don't think there's any good content. I talked to the guy who runs Tipitat, who runs the VR fund, just the night before last, and he said, "Wait, people still don't think there's good content for VR?" Like, most of the people I know don't. They're not finding it. And so what I found to be interesting is that we spend a lot of time talking, everything's looking for the killer app. What's the thing that's going to make VR or AR suddenly work, right? Now, some of us think it might be the Spielberg movie Ready Player One that comes out next year. It's a book that's pretty popular. It's got an interesting story. We're not 100% sure. We don't know what they're doing with it. But one of the things that this whole discussion has spurred is this idea that there honestly is no killer app for VR or AR, right? It'll be used in everything we do. So there's not, you're never going to point to a thing, right? If you're a teacher, the killer app for VR is education. If you're a brand marketer, it's a totally different thing. So, you know, and part of this, a friend of mine who's in the audience who tells me not to make fun of my age, but I have to do it. So part of the problem when you've been around and you've done it a long time is you talk to people and they're like, well, it's so hard because we don't have good graphics yet. Seriously, come see me afterwards, or this, part of the thoughts of this are on a blog post. I'll give you the link. Look at a game, Google it right now. I don't care if you do that while I'm talking. Google Dactyl Nightmare and look at what that game looked like. Dudes, you want to talk about limitations of hardware and software? You should have been doing this shit 25 years ago. But it was a nightmare. Nightmare. When the only people who could build VR environments were military people. When I couldn't get a backup head mount into France because ours broke, because customs considered it military equipment. Right? And not to mention the head mount we used we used one head mount that was $150,000. The cheap head mount was $7,500, and it was a single LCD panel that looked like a squid wrapped around your head, right? So the difference was, though, that back then, and people that I'm starting to see today, are getting away from the limitations. So the first thing I talk about is when you're looking at the killer app, it doesn't exist. It's about the killer experience. It's about the thing that's going to emotionally connect with somebody that goes, I totally get this now. I totally see why this is powerful. So Tipitat, who I was talking to the other day, his epiphany, he suffers like I do. I don't do heights anymore. I could just about do this, right? So he was building his own VR thing to play with it, and he was building the Matrix, because that seemed like a cool thing to build in VR. And so he was building the thing where you jump the buildings. And the way it worked is if you didn't make the building, you would fall the whole way, but you bounced at the bottom, right? So you obviously didn't die. And so he wasn't really thinking about it. He's building the wireframes, and he's building it bit by bit. And he realized that by about 2 or 3 days into this, he wasn't afraid of heights anymore, right? Like, that's how powerful this technology can be. Now, he wasn't setting out to build this most awesome, I can cure people's fear of heights thing, but that's what he ended up doing, and that's when he realized this was really powerful. So, you know, there will be a day when kids go to school and the teacher doesn't say, open up your book to page 72 and let's look at pictures of ancient Rome. It'll be, put on your head mount, let's go back to ancient Rome. Also, probably late 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, a group called the Vogue Society in Amsterdam built, using AR, a teaching tool for high school kids, where they could go to specific locations in Amsterdam, hold up a phone, and see what that location looked like in the 1600s. That's a kind of cool way to learn, you know? So we see a lot of opportunity to stop thinking about we don't have and just make. So that's one piece of it, right? Just getting out of the headset, the mindset of we can't. The second thing that I love as a theater person, right? I have a background in theater. I used to perform stuff, is we're not focusing on the whole physical environment, right? Usually, with rare exceptions, like Tribeca does a pretty good job at this, but generally speaking, when you show up to do a VR demo, there's a chair and a desk and a VR system. There's no sense of getting into a story, right? You go from nothing to suddenly being there, and then you're worried, who has done a head mount thing and not run into something? Tripped over a desk, fallen out of the chair, right? Because we're worried about that stuff. So what we saw, and I'm seeing really cool things, Diesel did this awesome thing where it was about conquering your fears. One of them was heights. And the way they did it was not just that you put on a VR thing and you go up high, because that's cool, but you walked along the ledge of a building to do it. So they built a building, wall, and a ledge. Now, you're only this far off the ground, so you're not falling anywhere. But when your back is feeling the wall that you're walking against, your brain is going, this is real. Dude, this is real. There's a wall here. And when your foot can feel the edge, your brain is thinking it's real. So looking for non-tech ways I know we get excited about stuff, and there's a lot of work being done on haptic suits, which I do events, I do public things. You got a haptic suit at home, that'll be cool and awesome. Imagine, if you will, that you're waiting online. There's a bunch of people. There's a person who's been wearing their haptic suit doing this thing. At the end of the experience, they take off the suit and they hand it to you, and you put it on. Ain't happening, right? So we're looking now to build the rest of the set, to create an environment that steps people into a story. That's the killer experience that makes people go, this is awesome. Jackie Morey, who's a dear friend for many, many years doing VR research, is doing a lot with smell, adding the sense of smell into the virtual world. Because again, that's a trigger in your brain. You smell certain things. You smell pine needles, you know you're in a forest. We used to do things where people wanted to be on a beach in virtual reality. A lot of tourism boards like this. We always tried to set it up in a sandbox, right? The sound, the feeling of the crunching on the, put some suntan lotion scent into the environment. People start to think, I'm really in this space. There's so many simple things that we can do to get the mind thinking this is real that we're just not doing today, and not expensively, right? I'm in a forest, put a couple tree branches near me, so that every now and then when I move, a tree branch brushes against my arm, my brain goes, this is real. So we're starting to look at what is the total experience that you can have. Now, AR, totally different world, right? There will be a killer app for AR. It's basically Tinder. I'll look at this audience, it'll tell me who I should date. I laugh, I have a 16-year-old daughter and who will be allowed to date in about 25 years, so I'm hoping the technology will be pretty advanced by then. But I joke all the time that she will go into a place, it'll facial recognition scan the people in the room, it'll match it against her database of criteria, and it'll tell her the 4 people she should go talk to. I am making the killer app for fathers, which all my app does is say no to anybody that gets to her app. It's just a complete shutdown filter. AR has a totally different set of killer apps and experiences coming to it. The brand world loves this. We don't want to walk down the world and have virtual billboards just jumping at our face. That's going to really annoy us pretty quickly. But we do want interesting information that will help us get through our day in a better way. So whether it's a better way to do directions or a better way to find out information about something. If you're in New York and you walk around, you frequently see a plaque on a building that tells you somebody lived there, but you don't know who that person is or anything about them. It'd be kind of cool to use AR to look at it. AR in the real world will also open opportunities for layers of information. So many years ago, I happened to have the opportunity to fly to Warsaw. We spent a couple weeks there. And we decided one afternoon we were going to find the last wall of the Jewish ghetto. Literally like 2.5 hours looking for this thing. The only reason we found it, and honestly to this day I can't tell if we actually found it or if it was another group of American tourists who were just joking with us because somebody pranked them on this. So this group saw us, they said, you're looking for the wall? We said, yes. They said, it's in the courtyard of a building. You have to like sneak in when somebody buzzes themselves into the apartment building, which we eventually did. I was not traveling with my daughter at this trip, although this is what she would have said. So we did this, take 2.5 hours, we've walked around the block, we finally find this thing, we go into the courtyard, and it's a brick wall. An important, significant brick wall, but it's a brick wall. And my daughter would have said, dude, you could have pointed to any brick wall in the city 2.5 hours ago and told me that was the wall, I would have been okay with it. Right? But AR would let that wall come to life. It would let the stories of that wall come to life. It would create a totally different physical engagement than we have with the world today. It would layer information that we don't have access to. At another point in Warsaw, there was a Catholic church. I'm a Catholic. If you know Catholic churches, they always have saints, statues of saints. They always have St. Jude, one of the go-to statues. He is the patron saint of impossible causes. So you find out you have stage 4 pancreatic cancer, he's your go-to guy, right? So every Catholic church has one. There had to be in Warsaw, there had to be 1,200 statues of St. Jude. this one statue in this one church that we went into was covered in rosary beads. That's what you do when you're praying to St. Jude. And the whole 2 walls behind him was all little plaques with people's names. So, you know, now we're like, well, what made this the go-to statue? What happened here that people went, oh man, you're in trouble, you got to go to that statue, not the 1,199 other statues. That's the statue to go to. So for us, it opened up this thought, like, what could we do to put information on that? What could we say, here's what happened. You know, this cathedral, as people played to this place in Old Town, and I don't know, I'm totally making this up, so don't be like tweeting, oh, I heard this great story about a cathedral in Poland. Totally making this up, right? It could be that this cathedral survived the bombings of World War II and the rest of this area was decimated. And it became the impossible. And so everybody goes there. So that's one level of the story, right? I get to know why this statue of St. Jude. But then I want to know what's the individual stories. Why did that person pray to St. Jude? Now, they don't have to share that story, but to me, that would be an interesting thing to start to learn. So AR is going to open up, like honestly, it took me a good 25 years to remember mom and dad's name as mom and dad, not their actual names. I still don't get their birthdays. Right? I'm 58. I still don't honestly remember their birthdays. I would love short-term facial recognition. I've met somebody at an event like this. We've exchanged business cards or we've connected on LinkedIn. I would like to be able to look at them through my Google Glass and just remind me you met them at Propelify in 2017 or wherever it was, because that'd be helpful to me. And it would make it less awkward, because how often do we go... CES? No. You know, we do that a lot with people. So to me, it would be great. So as we're looking for killer app, we need to start broadening the definition to killer experience. And to be thinking, what else gets added into that whole experience that makes people, like I'm a theater guy. So we were talking, Corey and I, backstage. My first job out of college was, as I said, I was a Disney performer. I occasionally did characters. Disney is awesome at setting the whole stage, right? There's no like, you'd walk up to a door and there's a ride there. By the way, a little side thing that we used to do because we're kind of cruel. You know, we love waiting in lines in this country. We love our lines. So we would be like 3 or 4 employees off the clock, so we'd be in regular clothes, and we'd walk up to a wall. And we would just start waiting there. And in 10 minutes, we had 50 people waiting in line behind us. And then we'd go, you know, this is taking too long, let's move on. And we'd leave them there. And you just watch people and they're like, why are you waiting? I don't know, something happened here. All right, I don't really know. But Disney's awesome. Who's been to Universal Studios? Right? Harry Potter World. Oh my God, that's a great environment that sucks you into that story. Right? You do that piece where you walk into the wall to get into the train station? That little, you know what I'm talking about? It's that little magic trick. It's called Pepper's Ghost. Everything they do is about sucking you into the story so that you are totally immersed in everything you do. With VR, we tend to just dump, right? It would be like parachute you into the middle of the ride of Harry Potter and not make you walk through that whole environment to get sucked in and to have that full experience. So let's see, I know I have one more point here. I will apologize, I was on a RedEye last night, so as a friend of mine posted this morning, I was on United, and the joke of the day is that United is now providing both red eyes and black eyes on their flights. I was fortunate to only be on a RedEye, although it did make me a little tired tonight. So let's see, the last piece I want to cover. Oh, sorry, this is my big one. So events. Now again, I do events. I'm not talking about stuff you do at home. I'm not talking about anything else. Events. I cannot stand when you go to an event and people have no idea how long the game is going to take. Right? Because they're demoing just a video game. You could play for 3 days. Makes it really hard when I have a kid who says, do I have time to go to the bathroom? I don't know, because I don't know how long they're playing. When we were doing VR stuff on the road, 5 to 7 minute cycle time. That was your entire time. The challenge with that is it can't be a partial experience. It has to be 5 to 7 minutes, and I've heard the whole story. You can't be like, well, I'm Little Red Riding Hood, and I'm on my way to Grandma's house, and now I've stopped. I need to get through the whole thing. And I need to have that full story arc. So we need to start thinking as we're introducing people to VR. You know, when you drop me into a game, and I'm not a gamer, I don't really know what to do. Anybody remember Pop Tropica? From if you had kids. My daughter played Pop Tropica like nonstop. The game was you would get into a world and you had to figure out what to do. I have no patience for that at all. Tell me what I'm supposed to do. I can figure it out, but don't just drop me into a room and say, I don't know, there's something here. With VR, that's especially hard because most people don't have the patience to figure out what could this do. They come out of an experience that doesn't tell the whole story, and they don't get it, and therefore they don't think the tech works. So that challenge is, and it also helps for throughput, because honestly, if you're doing events and marketing, you got to figure out how many people you're getting through. So we used 5-minute cycle time, which gave you 12 people per head mount per hour. But that ability for people to have a complete experience and not a partial. Now, you could tell me the story of Little Red Riding Hood in version, you know, and the first time I go in, and then I could go in and do Cinderella the second time. You can build on the story. You can give me chapters, but you can't give, I don't think it works well when we just give people a part of the experience. So if I'm reading this correctly, that was the whole time. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. I do, like I said, I have a lot of these images. If anybody wants them, just grab me afterwards, and I'll be happy to send the link to you. Have a great rest of the festival. Enjoy the day. Enjoy the great weather. Have a couple beers. And we have somebody coming up next.